När vi började sätta ihop det här schemat för Vision Europa så vi trodde knappt det själva att vi kunde fylla en dag med så pass många intressanta nationalistiska företrädare. Och det är ganska tydligt att om vi ska kunna göra det här nästa år och fortsätta öka i den här takten så då får vi köra 2 dagar. Hur det ska gå till rent logistiskt har jag ingen aning om. Men det är 1 år på oss att räkna ut det. Vår näst sista talare för kvällen är också utannonserad som huvudtalare. De av er som lyssnar på Radio Framåt känner till att jag har spenderat några år i Tyskland. Och där har jag fått möjlighet att lära känna många tyska nationalistiska företrädare. Och det här är en av dem. Och en person som jag beundrar och ser upp till. Och därför hoppas jag att ni också kommer förstå det när han är klar. Så från Tyskland, från NPD, välkomnar vi herr Udo Pastörs.
So, dear Stefan Jakobsson, dear Jan Eriksson, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation, and honored and courageous members of the national resistance movements throughout Europe. Thank you again for the invitation, which is both an honor and at the same time it is a duty for me as well. A duty that provides me with an opportunity to present to you my personal views as well as the views of the Nationaldemokratische Party of Germany on a variety of important issues, including economic policy, foreign and defense policy, and the current state of European politics. Before I begin my presentation, however, allow me to say a couple of words regarding your beautiful fatherland, Sweden, and its relationship to my country, Germany. It was the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 that finally ended the 30-year war, but not before the people of Europe had nearly torn themselves apart. Relentlessly driven on by the clergy and world powers, out of these dramatic events during the first half of the 17th century arose an enduring connection between the Swedish people and Germany, a connection that was particularly relevant for the people of my home state, Mecklenburg-Pomerania. After 1720, both Swedish Pomerania and the city of Wismar undoubtedly lost their significance for Sweden. Nevertheless, the relationship between our two peoples since the region of King Gustav VI Adolf right up until today, despite all ups and downs, has remained lively and vital, as you can see here today. Still, today in Mecklenburg-Pomerania, we celebrate the enduring Swedish influence on the Hanseatic cities of Wismar and Rostock. And my estimated ladies and gentlemen, there were, and are, well, I would like to say, not only attractive women in Sweden, but also in Mecklenburg-Pomerania. For surely the already maintained Swedish King Gustav VI Adolf was aware of this when he got engaged to a Mecklenburg princess. But it wasn't only the relationship of the nobility that were so binding. Whether in Swedish literature, the sciences, and especially in music, the Germans have left their traces behind. So much so that one can say without any hesitation that there is a type of kindship between the Swedish and the Germans, ladies and gentlemen. And because this is so, it is only logical and consistent that we nationalists stand together in the struggle to preserve our cultural and ethnic identity. And so I ask you, where do the people of Central Europe stand today? The big picture can be outlined as follows. With the dictatorship of neoliberal economic policies, the stock of the white peoples is actually threatened. In the first instance, the economic conditions in Europe today have led us to a situation. Excuse me, my manuscript, my English is not perfect, so I need this paper here. Stand today, with the dictatorship of the neoliberal economic policies, the stock of the white peoples is actually threatened. In this first instance, the economic conditions in Europe today have led us to a situation where far too few indigenous children are seeing the light of the day in our homelands. This situation is further aggravated by the disastrous dictatorship of the European Union, which seems absolutely determined to act as a sole guarantor for the interests of the capital markets, which in turn hurts and weakens the national states of whole Europe. What sort of Europe is that, where governments sacrifice the future of their own youth at the altar of profit maximization? Let us look at Spain, for example. 52% youth unemployment, waves of immigrants from North Africa at levels which the Spaniards themselves could never have imagined. As we speak, the youth of Southern Europe is hiding north, particularly to Germany, in order to escape the miserable conditions in their own countries. But we must be honest with ourselves. The current German government is lying when it tells young Spanish people that there are enough qualified work with good pay. Only a couple of weeks ago, the German government released its so-called poverty report. Yes, you heard right, a poverty report concerning Germany. This paper is living proof of the injustices that are being practiced by the German government against their own people. We still have 4 million people unemployed in Germany. But as noteworthy is the fact that 25% of those who are employed must get by with a monthly after-tax wage of under 700 euro a month, and this in an environment of rising rents and living costs. It is these conditions, particularly almost young people, that are contributing to the appallingly low birth rate in Germany. Next to Italy, a country that once enjoyed one of the highest fertility rates in all of Europe, Germany now has the lowest birth rate on the entire continent. In contrast, the export figures of the big German corporations are impressive. However, the profit from these endeavors is only flowing into the pockets of a very few. And the government, well, naturally, it pats itself on the back as it panders to its corporate clientele. Here in Sweden, the situation is similar, if not, thanks be to God, quite so grim. In the referendum on the 14th of September 2003, the Swedish people did, of course, successfully reject their unconditional entry into the economic and currency union. Your country, Sweden, is the best living proof that the euro lie has at last been revealed, ladies and gentlemen. Helmut Kohl and his political devotee, Frau Angela Merkel, swore to the German people that without the euro, the Federal Republic of Germany would become poorer, and that this new currency was vital to maintain the peace on the European continent. Yet, the exact opposite is true. Here in Sweden, we can see that the economic conditions are relatively good. They are relatively good for two reasons. Firstly, because the Swedish people are a performance-based, intelligent and hard-working people, just like the Germans. And secondly, because you were able to preserve your own national currency, the krona. And there are good signs, despite the efforts of the ruling classes, that the Swedish people will maintain their own currency. Because, to the best of my knowledge, the new 1,000 krona notes have already been printed, which starting in 2015 should be brought into circulation by your national central bank. You, ladies and gentlemen of the national resistance, have bravely fought against the introduction of the euro and are consistently demanding the rightful withdrawal of your land from the EU. Because only in this way can the great social questions of Europe be solved. The social question can only be solved under the auspices of a national framework, and this national framework will only be achieved when each and every individual feels a deep, enduring connection to his or her own people. Our battle cry is not profit maximization at all costs. No. The battle cry of the national resistance movements throughout Europe and the world is preserve the ethnic identity of all peoples so that we together can preserve true cultural diversity on this planet. But, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to make one last comment about the euro currency. Andreas Borg, Sweden's finance minister, was one of the great propagandists for the euro. Today, he is certainly a relieved man that he receives his salary, a very generous salary at that, in Swedish krona. There are people today cut from the same cloth as Andreas Borg, who despite all that has happened, would gladly step in and rescue the euro. And with that, they would be ready to inflict massive economic burdens on the Swedish people. Here today, unfortunately, I have not the time to describe a comprehensive account of what a modern, nationally organized economy would look like. So I will limit myself to a few basic points. We nationalists demand that companies operating in Central Europe be protected from unfair foreign imports. We demand the renationalization of public utilities and other public services, which in turn will compensate only individual investors and pension funds. We understand that the privatization of public monopolies does not benefit either the customer nor nations in large. We will increase taxes on companies which outsource work abroad. We will introduce a marriage allowances for families with children and not for homosexuals here in Europe, ladies and gentlemen. We will implement an ownership and profit-sharing plan for workers, which in turn will encourage savings and investment. We will halve local council taxes by centralization, education costs, and eliminating all spending on multicultural programs, which in turn would eliminate massive layers of unnecessary bureaucracy. And last but not least, jobs in Germany for Germans first, jobs in Italy for Italians first, jobs in France for French men and women, jobs throughout all the European nations for all those who believe in the principles of work, family, and fatherland, ladies and gentlemen. The boom and bust policies of a broken and corrupt economic system must be brought to an end, and the worldwide irreplaceable natural resources are being depleted at an alarming rate. We have a duty to our children to ensure that the policies of economic growth are only pursued when that growth is environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable in the long term. Let us now turn our attention to foreign policy. Foreign policy is first and foremost a matter of security. To look out into the world can only be done when one has first looked inward at one's own house. Here today, I will not be able to address military or security matters in great detail, but let me make 4 key points. First, the European people do not need to be patronizingly protected by NATO and the United States of America. Secondly, a Europe of free people must be guaranteed by a radically different and newly organized defense strategy. Of course, this would include a sovereign force capability with prerequisite nuclear weapon systems, so long as other powers also have such weapons at their disposal, ladies and gentlemen. Thirdly, contrary to all the official proclamations, the United States is running away from Europe and increasingly looking toward Asia and China. This change in policy is of course due to America's growing financial and economic dependence on China. But the danger exists that such a global realignment will expose Europe to a further economic and military blackmail, ladies and gentlemen. Fourthly, we, the National Democratic Party of Germany, support an immediate German withdrawal from NATO, as we also support an increased partnership with Russia, not just militarily, but also economically and culturally. Russia must, however, of course, accept the integrity of all Eastern nations. Any who thinks about foreign policy must also address him or herself to the consequences of the Schengen border openings in Germany and in Central Europe. More than 5 years have passed since Poland and the Czech Republic joined the Schengen Agreement. It was the 24th of December 2007 when the German borders with Poland and the Czech Republic became so-called EU internal borders. With the establishment of an EU internal border or Schengen border between these states, regular identity checks of individual crossings from one state to the other state were demanded no longer necessary. Instead, random border control checks are now undertaken by local police in the affected jurisdictions. But when Schengen II was being considered, it was predicted by many experts that this free movement of persons crossing into Germany from Poland and the Czech Republic would lead to an increase in criminality and migration from people outside Europe. Those predictions have been confirmed. For example, freedom of movement has been extended into sovereign countries, and asylum seekers now receive financial assistance comparable to that received by unemployed nationals in the most countries in Europe. Taken together, these policies have led to a considerable increase in the number of applications for asylum in Germany and also here in Sweden and in whole Europe as well. Adding to these developments has been the considerable effort of the Western powers to promote and facilitate democratization in North Africa and Asia, with the result that further waves of refugees have been landing onto European shores. For the individual states in Germany, the care and housing of these foreigners requires significant financial outlays. In order to stem the worst excesses of this Schengen legislation, other countries have in the last few years again and again temporarily suspended complete freedom of travel across their borders. In 21, the Danish government authorized the reinstatement of border controls. In the face of both these threats, the rise in criminality and the tremendous pressure caused by the increase in the number of asylum seekers, the NPD in Germany is calling for immediate measures to counteract such alarming developments. As such, members of the NPD in the State Assembly of Mecklenburg-Pomerania have put forward the following measures. Reintroduce to proven method of stationary border controls with immediate effect. Put a stop to any plans for further reduction in the police force along the border. The rule regarding the 30-kilometer limit, as it is currently designed, must be rethought so that police officers are able to reach every location on the border during their designated shifts. Ladies and gentlemen, the German government is aware of the dangers of uncontrolled migration and of race mixing. But all they do is lull the German people into a morass of sentimental nonsense, as fails utopia of one world, while all the time the German nation, das deutsche Volk, is sinking further and further into despair. As the German poet Gottfried Herder taught us, the proud peoples of this world are the voices through which God speaks to us. And it is our task today, our common purpose, my fellow comrades, to stand against and resist in Sweden, in France, in Spain, in Austria, in England, in Italy, to list but a few of our fellow nations. These cunning policies of mass migration and multiculturalism, which in turn lead to the destruction of our European peoples. There is, yes, only one world, that is right. But this one world is only worth loving and preserving when Europe is the Occident and will never and never be shaped into the Orient. We nationalists respect all religious faiths. However, a religion that appoints itself as a chosen entity, an entity that ruthlessly pursues its own interest in the arena of world politics, will by its very nature remain the natural enemy of the peoples and their nations. And also with regard to Islam, this is not simply a religion, nor is it a cult. In its fullest form, it is a complete, total, and 100% system for life. Islam has religious, legal, political, economic, social, and military components. The religious component is merely a cloak, a disguise for all the other components. Islamization begins when there are sufficient numbers of Muslims in a country to agitate for their religious privileges. When politically correct, tolerant, and culturally diverse societies agree to Muslim demands for their religious privileges, these other components of Islam tend to creep in as well. And here, how it works today. As long as the Muslim population remains under 2% in any given country, they will for the most part be regarded as a peace-loving minority and not as a threat to the other citizens. This is the case in the United States, where they are less than 1%, and in Australia, where they are currently 1.5%. China has 1.8%, Italy 1.8%, Norway 2%. At 2 to 5%, this is when they start to proselytize to other ethnic minorities and disaffected groups, often with major recruiting from the jail and amongst street gangs. This is happening in Denmark, where the percentage is 2.8 to 3%, Germany 4.3%, the United Kingdom 3.5%, and in Spain 4.5%. And now to your fatherland here in Sweden. In your country, the percentage has risen from 1.6% in 1990 to over 6% officially here today in 2013. Once the share of population rises above 5%, this is when the Islamists begin to exercise an inordinate amount of influence in relation to the still relatively small percentage of the total population. For example, they will push hard for the introduction of halal, food that is clean by Islamic standards, thereby securing food preparation jobs for Muslims. They will increase pressure on supermarket chains to stock halal on their shelves, along with threats for failure to comply. This is occurring when the population percentage, this is occurring when the percentage reaches 40%, nations can expect jihad militia formations, sporadic killings, and the burning of Christian churches. And don't forget the Jewish synagogues. Look at what happened today in Bosnia. Ladies and gentlemen, in Europe today, the fox is guarding the henhouse. It is our duty to relieve that cunning animal of his command. The more who understand this, the better it will be for all our countries throughout Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, it is still possible to speak to those truths. But for how long? As you know, and as the world should know, in Europe and particularly in the Federal Republic of Germany, ever harsher laws are being introduced. Laws that are leading to the suppression of those who dare to criticize the current system. People are currently sitting in jail merely for politically expressing their own opinions on the themes which we have addressed here today. I myself was sentenced only in the last few weeks once again to a prison sentence for 10 months. My apparent crime in Germany even was its own name, an opinion misdemeanor. An opinion misdemeanor. Many jurists in an age-old tradition are now standing as the long arm of the law, protecting a regime which is determined at any cost to silence its opponents. We nationalists will never allow ourselves to be influenced. We must always keep our sights fixed on the broad horizon, so that the self-determination of our people is protected and preserved at all costs. And so I say to you now, ladies and gentlemen, fellow comrades, fight for the hearts and mind of our people. Fight our opponents in the parliaments. Fight them on the streets. Fight them in the courts. These words are my call to action, so that we may carry forth the fight for the freedom of the European white peoples and their proud nations. Ladies and gentlemen, we are united not only by our culture, we are also relatives by our blood. And my last 3 minutes, I would like to speak in my mother tongue, because my English is not as good as I wish. So I prefer to do 3 minutes in German. Die Kraft, liebe Kameradinnen und Kameraden, die wir brauchen, um den Kampf um die Freiheit unserer Völker zu erringen, die beziehen wir nicht aus Waffen oder Bomben. Die Kraft, die wir benötigen, um den europäischen Geist wieder zum Leben zu erwecken, das ist die Kraft, die wir ziehen aus unserem Glauben an unsere Völker. Glaube, Wille, Tat. Je fester wir glauben, je stärker wird unser Wille sein. Und mit starkem Willen, liebe Kameradinnen und Kameraden, erwächst uns die Kraft für große Taten, für die europäische Idee, für ein weißes, identitäres, kulturell ewiges Europa der Vaterländer und Völker. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Herr Pastörs.